"Why don't you just disappear?" She didn't shout it. It wasn't dramatic. It just dropped, hard and heavy, like something you can't take back. Lisa's voice was sharp, like a drawer slammed shut, and with that one sentence, everything that had been quietly piling up, the ignored calls, the clipped responses, the cold, polite silences, finally spilled out. I still had the serving spoon in my hand when she said it. The lemon bundt cake was sitting untouched in the middle of the table, roast chicken getting cold under soft candlelight. The whole house smelled like thyme and tension. I'm Elaine. I'm 73. And that Sunday evening, early in spring, I realized I'd stayed somewhere I was never truly welcome. It didn't start out badly. I brought dessert, Michael's childhood favorite. I even wrapped it in the old linen towel James and I used for picnics. Lisa opened the door but didn't look me in the eye. "You didn't need to bring anything," she said, flat. No smile, no warmth. Dinner was quiet, forced. Michael kept checking his phone and Lisa just kept sighing. I made a gentle comment, something like, "You look a little tired, dear. I hope you're getting some rest." I meant it kindly. Her fork hit the plate with a sharp clink. "You know what?" she said, suddenly standing. "I'm tired of the comments. I'm tired of the hovering. I'm tired of pretending this is normal." Michael didn't say a word, just looked down, like he always does. And then she said it. "Why don't you just disappear?" No one spoke, not even the kids downstairs. I imagined even they could feel the shift in the air. I stood up slowly. My knees ached, but I didn't let it show. I set the spoon down, picked up my purse, and folded the towel over the cake. I couldn't leave it behind. Not that it really mattered. Michael didn't stop me, didn't even whisper a quiet, "Wait, Mom," just kept staring at the wall like he was hoping it might swallow him whole. I didn't slam the door when I left. I've never been one for theatrics. Some goodbyes. Silence says more than words ever could. The drive home was short, but it felt endless. Charleston passed by in a blur of soft streetlights. I couldn't tell you what song was playing on the radio. I just remember turning it off. When I got home, this creaky old Victorian James and I bought back in '78, I didn't cry. I didn't even take off my coat. I just walked into the kitchen, bundt cake still in hand, and sat down. It was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking above the stove, the fridge humming in and out. I thought of James, how he would have stood up for me, not loud but steady. He used to say, "Home should be where you're safe, not where you shrink." And then I whispered, just loud enough to break the stillness, "Maybe I will." Not to hurt anyone, not for revenge, just because something inside me finally let go. A thread I'd been holding on to for too long. I wasn't disappearing. I was taking something back. I sat there with the cake for a long time before putting it in the fridge. Tomorrow I'd start packing. Just a few things. I didn't know where I'd go yet, but I knew I couldn't stay still anymore. I didn't cry that night. I just sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around an old chipped mug of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The house creaked next to me like it was breathing, familiar and worn out. I stared down the hallway, where sunlight used to pour in and little feet used to run through. The bundt cake was still sitting on the counter, untouched. Maybe I'd give it to Mrs. Holloway next door. It's strange how endings rarely look like you imagine. They don't always come with slammed doors or packed bags. Sometimes they're just quiet decisions made between sips of bitter coffee with sunlight slipping through lace curtains. I started in the dining room. That felt like the safest place to begin. I pulled out the good china, the ones we only used at Christmas or on our 35th anniversary. I wrapped each plate in old newspaper and packed them into boxes marked "Donate." The smell of aged paper and porcelain filled the room. Oddly comforting. Next was James's bookshelf. It was still full of his dog-eared paperbacks, crossword puzzles, and that old pipe collection from his grandfather. I ran my fingers along the cracked leather spines. For a second, I could almost hear him behind me chuckling, saying, "You'd give all my books away before I'm cold." I smiled. "You're very cold now, love," I whispered back. Then I opened the drawer in his desk and found a stack of letters from our son, Daniel, back when we still called him Danny. Crayon drawings of stick figures, misspelled words, little notes saying, "I love you, Mommy." My breath caught. I brushed my thumb over the corner of one letter. It was soft with age, and for a second I wanted to stop, to put it all back, pretend we were still those people. Then came a knock on the front door. It was Frank, our longtime friend and family lawyer, always in a sport coat, even in the middle of June. He stepped inside like he was entering something sacred. "Elaine," he said gently, nodding toward the boxes, "looks like you've made up your mind." "Half of it," I said, "the other half still arguing." We sat in the parlor while he walked me through all the practical things, property details, market trends, buyer timelines. He mentioned a new condo development near the lake. "There's a garden level unit, gets a lot of light, easy to take care of." I nodded, barely hearing any of it, until he said, "You don't have to rush, but you also don't have to stay." After he left, I walked upstairs and opened the hall closet. It smelled like cedar and fading perfume. Tucked inside was her shawl, my mother-in-law's, soft blue wool with hand-stitched edges. She wore it to every church service, every birthday dinner. I ran my hand over it, paused, then folded it neatly and placed it in the donation bag. I stood there for a moment, hands resting on the drawstrings. Then I said it out loud, not really to anyone, maybe just to the house. "I'm not doing this to hurt them. I'm doing this to save me." And in that moment, something shifted. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It was just quiet. 3 weeks later, I was standing in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled like fresh paint. And something even more rare, possibility. The walls were eggshell white. The carpet was a stiff beige that I knew would soften over time. No dents in the baseboards, no marks on the walls where kids had measured their height, no sound of James humming from another room, but still it didn't feel empty. It felt open, like I'd finally stepped into that space between what used to be and what might come next. I brought in one box. It was labeled "Only Essentials." Inside were a few frame photos, my mother's old teapot, and my leather-bound journal with the frayed ribbon still tucked inside. I placed the photos on the windowsill, one of James in his army uniform, one of me and Daniel on a swing set, he was 6, and one of my parents on their wedding day. Black and white, a little faded, but their smiles were still sharp. The place was simple, right above a flower shop and next to a little cafe that smelled like cinnamon and toasted bagels every morning. Just around the corner there was a tiny park with a walking path and benches where old men played chess. That first week, I walked everywhere. I nodded at strangers, waited for something to feel familiar. On Tuesday, I met Marta. She was maybe in her 70s, tiny, and wore bright red lipstick like it was armor. She watered her plants like it was a full performance and waved at me every morning like we were old friends. She didn't ask questions, just smiled and said, "Good start, honey." By Thursday, I made myself go to a neighborhood gathering at the community hall. I wore my floral scarf, pink with soft green trim, even though it felt way too cheerful for how I felt inside. I hovered awkwardly near the punch bowl until a younger woman, maybe mid-30s, came up and said, "That scarf is gorgeous. You wear it well." I smiled, and it wasn't fake. Not entirely, anyway. Later that day, I stopped by the cafe on the corner. The girl behind the counter had a nose ring and purple nails. She called me ma'am and asked if I liked strong or soft tea. I told her soft. "Chamomile, please." She handed me the mug with both hands like it was some kind of ritual. I sat by the window, watched the steam curl up into the air, and opened my journal. Day 1. I'm not gone. I'm just elsewhere. I let that sentence sit for a while before I closed the cover. On the way home, I caught my reflection in the cafe window. That same floral scarf framing my face, the sunlight softening the lines around my eyes. I looked okay, not glowing, not healed, but okay. That night, I unpacked the candle I'd been saving for special occasions and lit it in the stillness of my new living room. The flame flickered like it wasn't quite sure it belonged here either, but I went to bed without crying. For the first time in months, my pillow stayed dry, and that, I decided, was enough for today. I wasn't looking for some big new beginning. I just needed a place to rest my feet and maybe hide from the southern heat. That morning, the air was thick, sticky, heavy with gardenia and humidity, so I followed the only sliver of shade on Maple Street until a chalkboard sign caught my eye. It said, "The Lemon Leaf, Tea, Scones, Quiet." Inside, ceiling fans were humming over mismatched tables. Shelves held teacups that didn't match their saucers. Somewhere in the background, Ella Fitzgerald was playing softly. It smelled like bergamot and warm sugar. Honestly, I almost turned around. It felt too cozy, too personal. But then James's voice came back to me, just a memory. Find something that's just yours, Lainey. A corner the world can't invade. So I took a breath and stepped in. A woman in a lemon print apron, Ruby, her name tag said, smiled at me. One of those real smiles that reach the eyes. "First time?" she asked. "Pick any cup you like. We believe the cup chooses the person." They were arranged by color. I picked a pale blue one, a tiny chip on the rim like a dimple. "Chamomile, please," I said. "Coming right up, ma'am." I chose a seat in the very back, tucked behind a fern. The chair gave just enough to feel like it had been waiting for me. When the tea came, I wrapped both hands around the cup, let the steam fog my glasses. I kind of liked the blur. It felt honest. That's when I heard a voice, brisk, direct. "I refuse to drink alone, dear. It's bad for digestion." A woman with cropped white hair and cherry red lipstick stood beside me, holding her saucer like it was a business card. "May I?" I nodded before my nerves could stop me. She sat down across from me without hesitation. "Name's Agnes, retired nurse, expert eavesdropper." "Elaine," I said, "professional wanderer." She laughed, a sharp, joyful bark that turned heads, and she didn't care. "Well then, welcome to the Lemon Leaf, Elaine, professional wanderer. Ruby hides the good scones until 10. I got 2. She split one open, let the steam curl out, and pushed the bigger half toward me. Butter melted right into it. We talked. Or, really, Agnes talked and I just followed. She asked questions, and when I paused, she filled in the answers herself. We covered favorite books. She loved Dickens. I admitted I was more into cozy mysteries. Music. She swore Ella's voice could cure heart problems, and how family can make you feel invisible in a crowded room. 50 years I spent taking care of everyone else, she said, tapping her spoon like a period. When I finally retired, my boys thought I'd orbit their lives like a porch fan. Instead, I chose this place. Then she looked at me. "You look like someone learning to orbit herself." My eyes stung, that warm, embarrassed kind of sting. I took a sip of tea so she wouldn't see. It tasted like flowers and something else. Permission. Ruby stopped by to refill our cups. "Good company today?" she asked. "The best," Agnes answered before I could say a word. When I finally stood to leave, Agnes pressed a small bookmark into my hand. It was hand-stitched, shaped like a green leaf with gold trim. "It's okay to start your chapter now," she said. "Just don't write it alone." Outside, the heat didn't feel so heavy anymore. Back at the apartment, I opened my journal and wrote, "I didn't feel a raise today." I underlined it twice. Then I pulled out a coral lipstick I hadn't worn since James's funeral. In the bathroom mirror, the color looked hopeful, like sunrise after a long, sleepless night. Before bed, I signed up online to volunteer at the Children's Story Hour that Saturday. My finger hovered over the submit button, but I could hear Agnes in my head. Start your chapter. I clicked, exhaled, slid the bookmark into the journal, right between two clean pages, waiting to be filled. And if you've ever sat alone in a quiet room and wondered what comes next, you're not the only one. I'm learning, slowly, that starting over doesn't always mean starting from scratch. If any part of this story reminds you of your own, I'd love to hear about it. Just one memory, one moment. Drop it in the comments. I read every one. And if you feel like walking this road with me, stick around. The next part of this journey surprised even me, so don't forget to subscribe. What's coming next? It's quiet, but it matters. Saturday arrived wrapped in soft gray light, the kind that makes you feel like nothing's urgent, nothing's waiting. I stood by my front door for 20 minutes. I was dressed but not committed. My blouse was a little wrinkled, my hands were shaking just slightly from checking the clock too many times. I could have stayed home. No one would have known. But then I heard Agnes in my head, like a paper fortune tucked in the back of my mind. Start your chapter. So I grabbed my bag, the one with the little floral patch, and walked the 3 blocks to the Charleston Public Library. The children's section was warmer than I expected. The walls were painted with bright murals, giraffes, pandas, rainbows. Bean bags were scattered like a colorful little island in the middle of the room. The air smelled like old books, fruit snacks, and washable markers. "Hi, you must be Elaine," someone called out. A man in a navy cardigan waved me over. "I'm Josh. Thanks for coming. We've got about 10 kids today. Energetic crew." He handed me a copy of The Velveteen Rabbit. The corners were worn, the cover a little faded. I ran my fingers over it gently. I used to read this to Michael. He always begged, "Just one more chapter, Mama?" Just one more? My throat tightened. The kids were already sprawling across the cushions, legs tangled, hair messy, big grins everywhere. I cleared my throat. "Hi," I said, barely above a whisper. "I'm Elaine. Today we're going to read a story about a rabbit who, well, becomes real." They were watching me. A few were squirming. One little girl with pink glasses whispered something and giggled. I opened the book. The first few lines came out shaky, unsure, but somewhere between "There was once a velveteen rabbit" and "The Skin Horse explaining what it means to be real," my voice settled in. By the time the rabbit was old and worn out but deeply loved, I wasn't nervous anymore. When I closed the book, a small hand shot up. "Are you a grandma?" I paused. "No," I said with a soft smile, "but thank you for thinking I could be." Laughter bubbled from the corner. A boy named Sam crawled over and handed me a sticker. It was shaped like a star. "You read good," he said. "Thank you, Sam." I pressed the sticker onto my blouse like it was a medal. As the kids trickled out, parents gathered them up, offering quiet thank yous. One little girl, Ellie, I think, wrapped her arms around my leg in a hug. No words, just sticky hands and warmth. My heart filled in a way I hadn't felt in years. Josh came back with a clipboard. "Would you consider reading again next week? The kids really liked you." "Maybe," I said, but even as I said it, I already knew I would. Later at home, I set the Velveteen Rabbit next to my teacup. I hadn't been asked to keep it, but that spot on the table just felt right, like something had cracked open in me, just a little. That night, I dreamed of James. We were on a couch that doesn't exist anymore, sitting side by side under a blanket. He turned the pages of a book in silence. I couldn't see the words, but I didn't need to. I leaned on his shoulder, and he let me. I woke up just before sunrise. My phone was blinking. A missed call. Michael. No voicemail, just his name and a timestamp. I watched the screen until it faded to black. And there I was, my reflection in the glass, older but not invisible. Have you ever stepped into something new, quietly, unsure, and found it was exactly what you needed? If you have, I'd love to hear about it. Just one small moment, one memory. Drop it in the comments. I read every one, and if you're still here, still walking this road with me, thank you. Stick around, because the next part of this journey, it still tugs at the heart. I never planned to sell the house. I just wanted to breathe without the walls counting every sigh. But one August morning, the idea of space turned into something more permanent, and I knew that key would end up in someone else's hands before summer ended. Tall grass brushed against my calves as I crossed the yard. The mailbox was stuffed with grocery flyers and a postcard from a dentist who didn't know we'd stopped smiling there a long time ago. Vines curled around the porch rail like they'd been waiting for permission to take over. I hesitated at the front door. The lock turned stiffly, the metal groaning like it knew I was letting go. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old lavender sachets. Light filtered through the curtains my mother-in-law had hemmed, landing right on the floor where Daniel, back when he still went by Danny, used to race his toy cars. I walked through each room, skimming my hand over everything familiar, the smooth groove on the banister where James's ring wore down the wood, the closet knob that always caught my sweater. In the dining room, I opened the hutch and traced my finger along the edge of the floral dishes I'd decided to leave behind. For whoever needs them next, I whispered. The china didn't argue. It just sat there, like it understood. James's desk waited in the study. I had told myself months ago I could never let it go. But here we were. I opened the drawers. The stationery was yellowing at the edges. His old fountain pen was dry. There was an unfinished crossword dated just a few days before his heart attack. I closed the drawer gently and placed both hands on the wood. You were never the desk, I said. You were the man behind it. Right on time, Brenda's heels clicked across the porch. "Morning, Miss Elaine," she said, soft and polite, with that professional sympathy in her eyes. She handed me a folder, thick with contracts and empty lines waiting for ink. We sat at the kitchen counter, one pen, two signatures, and 52 years of history folded into clean little columns of numbers. "It's a strong offer," she said, pointing to a few bold lines like comfort could be found there. I nodded. I signed, and nothing inside me broke. Maybe because the breaking happened months ago, when Lisa's words started chipping at the foundation. Mrs. Green came over as Brenda was packing up. She shuffled across the lawn and placed a jar of fig preserves in my hands. "For the road," she said. "Figs are stubborn. They grow best after they've been cut back." Her hug was firm and quick, the kind of hug older women give when they're handing you courage. Brenda locked the front door, sealed the key in a small envelope, and handed it to me. I closed my fingers around it, then opened them again. "Give it to the buyers," I said. "I won't need it." Driving away, I stopped at the red light where James once jumped out to pick wildflowers from an empty lot. That lot's a gas station now, but in my mind, he's still there, grinning, holding out a bunch of flowers like they cost a fortune. I reached across the seat, patted the empty spot, and smiled back. That afternoon, I sat at my new kitchen table and wrote 2 cashier's checks, one for Sophie, one for Caleb. I sealed them in plain envelopes, no return address, no note, because I've decided trust doesn't need instructions. As evening settled in, I lit the same little white candle I'd used my first night in the apartment. The flame rose steady, like it belonged there. I watched it flicker and felt something shift inside me, like the echoing rooms in my chest were finally quiet. "It's sold," I whispered into the stillness, soft but certain. "And so is the grief." The candle flickered once, almost like it understood, and then it kept burning, steady light for a different kind of home. The cafeteria smelled exactly like every school cafeteria I've ever walked into, floor wax, instant coffee, and dry erase markers hanging in the air like old gossip. Rows of folding chairs were set up, some already filled with parents rustling papers and silencing their phones. I signed in at the table marked Community Volunteers, tucked my reading glasses into the neckline of my sweater, and found a seat near the back. I was perfectly happy to blend in. Then I heard the sound of heels moving a little too fast and a whispered, "Sorry, traffic," that was just a bit too loud. I looked up. Lisa, my daughter-in-law. She didn't see me, at least, not right away. She slipped into a chair near the front, her coat still half on, gripping a clipboard like it might protect her. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, curled inward like she'd tried something new and wasn't quite sure about it. She looked tired, not just sleep-deprived, worn down. I took a slow breath and looked back at the agenda in my lap. Update from Reading Program Liaison. That was me. And right then, I realized just how much I'd hoped not to see her yet. Not like this. Mrs. Carter, the PTA chair, introduced me with a kind smile. "Miss Elaine's been reading with the first graders every Tuesday. The kids call her the Story Lady." A few parents chuckled politely. I stood. My legs were stiff, but my voice came out steadier than I expected. "I read to a little boy last week who wouldn't look up from his shoes," I began. But after the story, he asked if rabbits were real. I told him yes, and he said, "Good, then maybe magic is real too." There was a soft laugh in the room, not big, but kind enough. When I sat down, I let myself glance at Lisa. Our eyes met for just a second. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away. There was no anger there, just recognition. Afterward, I gathered my things slowly, not trying to linger, but not trying to run either. Out in the hallway, I heard a voice that stopped me. "Grandma." Sophie. She was taller than I remembered, backpack practically swallowing her. Her cheeks were flushed with real, unfiltered joy. She ran toward me like she hadn't missed a beat. I knelt down, and she wrapped her arms around my neck. She smelled like crayons and cinnamon. Behind her, Lisa stood still. Her jaw was set, hands clasped, but she didn't say a word. She didn't pull Sophie away. She just watched. Cautious, yes, but she let the moment happen. I looked up at her. I didn't smile, didn't speak, just met her eyes and gave a small nod. She nodded back, just once, then turned and walked down the hall. Sophie stayed. "Are you coming to more meetings?" she asked. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe I will." That night I sat beside my candle, the little white one I light when the day feels a bit too heavy. The flame flickered gently, like it was saying, "You did all right." I thought about Lisa's eyes, tired, guarded, but not cold, and I thought about the way Sophie hugged me, full of warmth without hesitation. The silence between us. For once it hadn't felt like a wall, just space, empty maybe, but not locked. "There's a door cracked open," I whispered, watching the wax pool. "Just wide enough for breath." At the next meeting, I brought shortbread. I didn't write my name on the tin. Some gestures speak better when they're quiet. Funny how seeing someone from your past can shake something loose you didn't realize you were still holding on to. Have you ever had a moment like that? Where the air shifts just a little and you wonder if something might be starting again? If you have, I'd love to hear about it. Just a sentence. That's enough. Leave me a comment. I read every one, quietly, like notes from old friends, and stick with me. What came next wasn't loud, but it mattered. The air smelled like warm cider and kettle corn, and for a moment I forgot why I was even there. Laughter floated through the crisp October breeze, mixing with the creak of wagon wheels and the soft clink of prize jars lined up at the game booths. I wasn't there for the crowd. I was there for me, but fate doesn't always wait for an invitation. The storytelling tent sat near the edge of the hay maze, tucked under a canopy of amber-colored trees. I wore my rust-colored scarf, The one James always said made my eyes look like autumn leaves right before they fall. Kids were scattered across straw bales, faces turned up toward me, eyes wide with that kind of wonder that makes you feel seen. I opened Charlotte's Web, and the words just poured out like they'd been waiting. My voice caught a little when I said the word friendship, but I kept going. About halfway through the chapter, I saw her, Sophie. She was sitting cross-legged in the front row, chin resting in her hands. She's 10 now, but in that moment she looked exactly like Michael did the year he helped me bake apple pie for the fair. She was completely still, focused, really listening. When the reading ended, there was a soft flutter of applause, like gentle rain. A few kids came up for high fives. One little girl handed me a drawing with shaky letters that said, "You're the best story lady." I smiled, thanked her, and tucked it carefully into my pocket. And then Sophie stepped forward. Her voice was softer than I remembered. "Do you still have Papa James's teapot?" I blinked. Didn't expect that. "Yes," I said. "It's still on my shelf. Still whistles when it's ready." She looked down at her shoes, then back up at me. "Can I come see it sometime?" My heart pulled tight, this mix of joy and ache all tangled together, but before I could answer, Lisa stepped beside her. She looked tired. Her eyes met mine for half a second, then moved to Sophie. "We'll talk about it," she said. Not cold, just careful. She placed a hand on Sophie's shoulder and gently guided her away. No harsh words, no tension, just quiet distance. I stood there, holding that drawing like it might break in my hands. Sophie turned once, just a quick glance over her shoulder. I waved. She didn't wave back, but she didn't look away either. Later that night, I brewed tea, same old teapot, and opened my journal. The words came slowly, carefully. The past echoes in children. Sometimes they remember what adults choose to forget. The fair had given me more than I expected. Not closure, exactly, but maybe a crack in the wall. A question I never asked, answered by a child too young to know she was answering anything at all. And that's when I realized maybe I hadn't disappeared. Maybe I was just waiting in the wings. For the moment someone remembered I used to be center stage in their story. The envelope looked ordinary. Cream-colored, no return address, my name written in Michael's careful block letters. It showed up on a Tuesday, tucked between a utility bill and a grocery flyer. I almost set it aside for later, but something about the weight of it made me slip a fingernail under the flap, right there by the mailbox. There was no letter inside, just one photo. And for a moment, the whole world narrowed to that glossy rectangle in my hand. It was Sophie. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and she was standing in front of their stainless steel fridge. Around her neck, my old floral scarf, the one I'd worn to the fall fair. In her hands, she held a round ornament made of painted popsicle sticks. On it, in purple glitter glue, Grandma's Teapot Club. Behind her, stuck to the fridge with magnets, was another photo. Me, James, and little Michael at Myrtle Beach, 1987. My hair was still dark back then. James was wearing those awful plaid shorts, and Michael was holding a seashell like it was the greatest treasure on earth. No note, just a memory, quiet and clear. I leaned against the kitchen counter, my breath catching, trying to steady the buzz in my ears. The apartment smelled like simmering cinnamon, something I usually do to chase off the winter gloom. But suddenly I could smell salt air too, hear distant waves and that old high-pitched giggle Michael had when he was 5. I carried the photo to the table and sat down, letting the afternoon light spill across it. My fingers traced the edges, almost needing the texture to make it real. Michael had taken that picture. I could tell by how Sophie was perfectly centered. The background cluttered just enough to feel alive. He must have seen that beach photo on their fridge every day, but today he chose to let me see that he'd kept it. The tears came soft, not heavy, just a slow tapping, like rain on a closed window, part grief, part something lighter. I let them come. When it passed, I set the photo beside my mug and watched the steam curl around it, like it was trying to read that memory too. Evening came early, the way December always does. I made a little soup, barely tasted it, washed the bowl, dried my hands on that faded yellow towel James used to call sunshine colored. Then I opened the junk drawer, found a magnet shaped like a smiling sun, and pinned Michael's photo on my fridge, right next to the crayon drawing that said, "You're the best story lady." I stepped back and looked at that tiny collage, a fair drawing, a new photo, a scribbled grocery list, past, present, and everyday life, all fitting into 12 square inches of refrigerator door. And for the first time in a while, the apartment felt warmer. I whispered into the stillness, "You remember. You still remember." It came out like a prayer, or maybe a thank you. Later that night, frost traced the edges of the window. I made chamomile tea, turned on my bedside lamp, and pulled a blank postcard from my desk. On the front, there was a soft watercolor of the Ravenel Bridge, its white cables stretched like harp strings across a blue Charleston sky. "Dear Sophie," I wrote, the pen hovering just long enough for my heartbeat to settle. Outside, a wind chime rang somewhere down the street, playing a tune only cold nights know, and I smiled, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't writing into silence. I was writing across a bridge someone else had already started building. I wrote it at 3:07 in the morning. The apartment was completely still except for the soft hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the walls settling. A lemon-scented candle flickered next to my tea. It was too late for logic, too early for regret. The words came slowly, hesitant, like they were afraid of what they might reveal. "Dear Lisa, you asked me to disappear." I did, but I didn't vanish. I paused for a moment, just listening to the sound of my own breath. Outside, frost had blurred the world beyond the window, quieting everything but memory. I disappeared from birthday dinners, from school pickups, from the kitchen where I used to slice apples for Sophie's lunch, from the porch where James and I once sat and watched Michael ride his first bike down the block. I disappeared so completely I forgot the sound of my own voice when it wasn't apologizing. I kept writing as the candle burned low and the tea turned cold. I knew no one would ever read it, but that wasn't the point. "I didn't vanish," I wrote. "I just stepped out of the picture you painted, the one where I was always too much or not enough, and for a while I believed it. Believed that I was the problem, that I was heavy, inconvenient. But do you know what brought me back? It wasn't your apology, because you haven't sent one. It wasn't Michael, even though I still love him. It was Sophie. The way she asked about the teapot, the way she remembered, I wrote about James, how he used to tuck silly little notes into Michael's lunchbox, how grief never really leaves, it just shifts, becomes part of the furniture. Lisa never knew the version of me who was light, the one before the funerals, the fractured holidays, the years of second guessing. But she's still here, the woman who laughs too loudly in tea shops, who reads Charlotte's Web with a catch in her throat. And I let myself write it. Even if no one ever saw it, maybe I wasn't easy to love either. I held on too tight. I spoke when silence might have been better, but I showed up. I tried, and trying should count for something. The letter spilled out, not angry, not begging, just honest. When I finished, I folded it slowly, the way you do with something that feels sacred, even if it's only for you. I slipped it into my journal, right between a grocery list and a pressed leaf from the fall fair. Agnes once told me, "Sometimes you write to free the ghosts, not to speak to the living." That morning I finally understood what she meant. I didn't need Lisa to respond. I didn't need her to apologize or change. I just needed to hear myself say it out loud. I'm still here. I matter, even in silence. The candle was almost gone, just a little flicker left. I watched the light dance, casting soft shadows across the wall. And then I whispered into the quiet, maybe the healing was never supposed to come from them. Maybe it was always supposed to come from me. And for the first time in years, I didn't flinch at the sound of my own voice. It didn't echo. It landed, right here, where I live now, whole even without permission. It started out as a joke. One morning at the tea room, Agnes looked at me and said, "You've practically got your own society with all these women orbiting your tea habits." I laughed, then paused and said, "Maybe I should." 2 Tuesdays later, there were 5 of us in my apartment. We didn't have a name or a charter or matching mugs, just a folding table, a borrowed tablecloth, and teacups, chipped, mismatched, and loved. The whole place smelled like lemon scones and cinnamon, and outside the rain tapped gently on the window like it was waiting for its own invitation in. Agnes brought her usual sass and a tin of chocolate biscuits, just in case the scones were terrible. They weren't, but she ate 4 anyway. Ruby showed up with a little pouch of loose-leaf tea she called Serenity Blend. And Marjorie, a retired English teacher, started telling us a story about her first car before she even had her coat off. Jeanette came last. She was newly widowed, still carrying that stunned look around her edges. Her hands shook a little when she held her cup. She didn't say much at first, just listened and cried. And we didn't ask her to stop. We just sat, sipped, let the space do what it needed to do. When it was my turn, I talked about James. Not how things ended, but how they began. How we once danced in the grocery store aisle because our song came on the speaker. How he used to make me laugh even when the sink was leaking and the lights were flickering. Ruby leaned in. "That's the good stuff," she said. "The quiet gold." Agnes nodded. "You don't get to keep everything, but you get to keep that." It wasn't therapy. It wasn't a support group, but something got stitched back together anyway, and as we were gathering our coats to leave, Jeanette took my hand and whispered, "Thank you for letting me be broken here." I smiled and squeezed her hand. "You're not broken," I said. "You're just unfolding." That night, while wiping up crumbs and rinsing out cups, I found an envelope tucked under the napkin holder. Sophie's handwriting, looped and careful, peeked out. Inside was a hand-drawn card, covered in glittery stickers, and a slightly crooked heart. To Grandma. Honorary founder of the Teapot Club. Love, Sophie. I stood there in the quiet warmth of my kitchen. The only sounds were the drip of the faucet and the faint echo of laughter still floating in the air. In that moment, I wasn't just someone's mother-in-law. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't a mistake. I was Elaine, the woman with a lemon-scented candle, a calendar full of Tuesdays, and a club made of heartbeats and hot tea. Just as I placed Sophie's card on the fridge, my phone buzzed. A message from Michael. "Sophie's birthday is next week. She asked if you'd come." I stared at it for a moment, my breath caught in that quiet space between memory and hope. No explanation, no apology, just an opening. The kind that doesn't swing wide or slam shut, just creaks, softly. I set the phone down, smiled to myself, and whispered, "Yes, sweet girl, I'll be there." I wore the same earrings I had on the day Michael was born, just little gold hoops, tarnished around the edges, slightly bent where time had pulled a little too hard. I almost didn't wear them, thought maybe they were too small to matter now, but something in me wanted to mark the day. The backyard was full of laughter and lemonade. Kids running through the grass, frosting on their cheeks, jelly stains on their shirts. Balloons tied to folding chairs and fence posts bobbed gently in the breeze, and the sunlight came through the trees like it knew it had been invited. I paused at the gate, holding Sophie's gift, a small frame wrapped neatly with a photo I'd found tucked away in an old drawer. It was James holding her as a baby, her tiny fingers tangled in his mustache. I didn't write a note. The photo said enough. Michael was at the grill. He looked up, surprised at first, then softened. "Hey, Mom," he said, just like that, like it was normal. "Glad you made it." He handed me a paper plate with a slice of carrot cake. Homemade, it seemed, the kind James always liked. Lisa was near the cooler, setting out cups. She looked over, held my gaze for a second too long, and said, "Thanks for coming." I smiled. "Thanks for having me." And that was it. No big thaw, no cold front either, just a quiet line drawn with dignity. Then Sophie saw me and ran over, her birthday crown a little crooked, glitter in her hair. She hugged me so tight I had to catch my balance. "I saved you a seat," she said, tugging my hand. She led me to a long picnic table, sat me right beside her, and leaned in like we'd always belonged there together. The other kids didn't think twice. The adults did. I noticed Lisa pause, but no one moved away. The table shifted to make space. That was enough. When it was time for cake, Sophie beamed, 11 candles flickering in the breeze. She closed her eyes and made a wish. I didn't ask what it was. I didn't need to. The laugh that escaped me then was soft, but it was real. It even surprised me. It echoed in my chest like something that had been waiting to be let out. Later, I helped clear some paper cups, wiped frosting from the corner of the table, and kissed Sophie on the forehead as the sun began to dip. She whispered, "Thank you for the picture. Papa James would have loved today." I swallowed hard and nodded. He would have. Michael walked me to the side gate. He didn't say much, but his hand rested on my shoulder just for a moment. That too was enough. I walked home slowly. The late afternoon sun spilled gold across the sidewalk. My feet ached a little, the gift bag rustled in the breeze. But I didn't feel tired. I felt whole. No fireworks, no dramatic moment, just the quiet peace of being there, of staying. And as I turned the corner toward my building, I said it out loud, not to anyone really, just to the air that had carried me through so many quiet mornings. I lived, not perfectly, not always kindly, but fully. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to prove it. I didn't leave that birthday party with a balloon or a slice of cake and a napkin. I left with something harder to name, but deeper, more lasting. I've learned that sometimes love doesn't come back in the same shape you gave it. Sometimes it returns softer, slower. But if your heart stays open, it finds a way. We can't undo the hurt, but we can outgrow it with grace, with patience, and by showing up anyway. If this story reminded you of a moment you've carried quietly, I'd be honored if you shared it in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more stories like mine, feel free to subscribe. I still have many cups of tea and a few more memories left to pour. And if today's story touched something in you, you might want to stick around for the next one. It's called "My Daughter Said My Opinion Didn't Matter, So I Didn't Leave Her a Cent."